today we have a section of speeches with our invited speakers. In the first lecture, we have the presence of Dr. Lúcia Carvalho Pinto de Mello, that has master degree in physics and from UFPE, and energy and environmental from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a special graduation training in the policy program at MIT. She was Deputy General Secretary. She was Deputy General Secretary for the Ministry of Science and Technology, and nowadays Lúcia is our Secretary of Science and Technology and Innovation of Pernambuco State. Lúcia represents all of us, researchers, and the future of research in our state. I'd like to thank your presence here, and I'd like to invite you to share with us important information about your work in our secretary. Thank you very much.
Como é melhor? Como é que você prefere? Elinando, você?
Vou estourar isso aqui.
Sorry.
Turn the lights down in there too, so the screen.
Better go there.
They turn the lights? Yeah.
Eu vou pra lá então. Então eu vou passar daqui.
Eu vou tentar ver isso. Tá passando isso. O laser aqui no meio. E aqui passa. Vai ter que passar.
Okay, so good morning for all of you. I'm sorry that I have to speak English, but I think it's a great opportunity for you as a young students, most of you are students, to get involved with the kinds of activity, because science and technology, especially today, is a worldwide business. So you need to read, to talk, and speech, and be very comfortable with English. It takes a while, and we will never be as fluent as a native, but we have to do our job. So if you have any other questions in Portuguese, I can share with you the information that I bring here. So I should start just saying thank you very much for Professor Elinando for the invitation to participate in this conference. It's very amazing how we have this level of science in a so distant place with so many difficulties that we have to face to do science. But also we have to recognize that we also living in a very special place with respect to the potential of economic development and possibilities for you as young people and having good opportunities for your future. So thank you very much, Elinando, and I hope I can share with you some ideas that we are putting forward within our government. I have to talk about science, technology, and innovation strategy. But to talk about a science, technology, and strategy for any place, you need to know exactly where you are and what does it mean for you to have science and technology and innovation, workforce, infrastructure, and economic activities. So we start just localizing Brazil, our state of Pernambuco. We have the real dimension of what we are. And also, if you take a look on the state of Pernambuco, it's also very important to understand how are our characteristics? So by the geographic point of view and from the cultural point of view and many other different point of view, we should call attention that we have a very interesting and diversified territory and biomasses. We have this whole station here. Petrolina is right here, as you know. In this whole station here of the state of Pernambuco belongs to a very global challenge that are the dry land, the arid and semi-arid region. And we have here an intermediary region, and you have on the coast a more humid region, 400 years tradition of sugarcane plantation that usually used to be very low technology intensive, but many things has started to change in the last years with the intensity of economic activities, university centers, and so the whole map of Pernambuco make us to reflect what we should do to promote science, technology, and innovation for the future of society, for the benefits, and for economic development. Some information that also I consider important in our strategy, and you have to pay attention to it. We are a state with 9.3 million people. It's a small state considering Brazil. But if you compare with many countries in the world, in Europe, for instance, it's very equivalent. We have 185 municipalities in an area of 8,000 square kilometers. Our economy represents 2.7% of the Brazilian economy, the GDP of Brazil. This is our size in economic terms. Our economic activity is predominantly services, but traditional service. About 73% of our economy is related to services. But it's not very sophisticated services, but all kinds of services. And the government side of this is very big, a very strong presence of government. The industry responds to 22%, agricultural to 5%. But we are also an exporter of some goods. Sugarcane, fish and crustaceans, electrical and electronic, very small, only 11% of our foreign trade, chemicals, clothing, and very recently we have export of automobile. As I will show to you, we have a very sophisticated and high technology intensive car industry in Pernambuco. We have also some advantage related to our ports. We have 2 ports for cruise and cargo, and the most important Suape is the cargo port. That's this complex here. That's one of the most sophisticated modern ports of Brazil. It's from here that most of the goods are moving to other countries, Europe, United States, but also Latin America and also Brazil. This I will recall that it's an important place, but in technology terms, we should be preparing ourselves for a big change that I will present to you during my presentation. And we have, for more than 10 years, when the economy was doing very well in Brazil, especially from 2004 to 2014, the state of Pernambuco grew faster than the Brazil in general. So we had these curves here showing that the green one is Pernambuco. So there was a big, big change in our country, and Pernambuco was benefited from this situation. Although we had economic growth and development, we have still very important challenges. We need to increase, for instance, our productivity competitiveness in the economic activity. Our productivity is very, very low. Most of it because of the low level of education, of the training, technical training of our people. We need to reduce our inequalities. We're still a very unequal country, and in Pernambuco, a very unequal state. We have a challenge to promote creativity and develop skills in the workforce, especially those related to what we call STEM plus C, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and computer science. These will be the abilities for the future. We need to create a cultural environment that's favorable to innovation and to science. It's not very well spread within our society. And we need to promote the diffusion of disruptive technologies in the production of goods and services. You are dealing here in this conference with some of those disruptive technologies. And innovation as a tool for economic recovery. Since the economic crisis started in Brazil, everything seems to going down, down, down. But we strongly believe that there is only way to recover this situation is by knowledge, spreading knowledge, training people, and making innovation one of our principal flags. And I will come now to the present time and look at the future. Our challenges, most of the challenges are related to our past, to our history, to the way our culture was developed, the way our economic activity was developed, with the monoculture of sugarcane, with the high concentration and all these stuffs. But we are facing a big challenge that is a real challenge to all of us, to Brazil and to Portugal. And I brought some data that illustrates the size of the challenge. We already, worldwide, it's recognized that 65% of the children entering the primary school will end up working in completely new jobs types that does not exist so far. This is a conclusion from the World Economic Forum. That's a very important initiative of leaders worldwide, from government, from industry, that discuss what should be done, what has to be done for the development of the society to face the disruption that we are facing right now, related to the advances of science and technology. We have in the so-called Internet of Things growing, and we have a data that's very impressive. 8.4 billion connected things in the 2016. Grew from 30% from 2016, and will reach 20 billion by 2020. Almost $3,000 billion will the expanding of the companies with Internet of Things. This is reality. This is a Gartner, that's an institution that every year they publish some of the challenges of technology, what are the trends that are facing us. The connectivity also become an important challenge, because this is transforming the international trade. This last year, more economic value was created by the flow of data than the flow of goods. And the decentralization of production will make that increase even more. So this is a very interesting picture of challenges that are related to science and technology. And in this environment of this conference, it's very convenient to bring these kind of topics for you to think about. And again, the World Economic Forum, in his 2016 meeting, they stress this sentence that I consider very important to the qualification. The change that we are facing are so profound that, from the perspective of human story, there has never been a time of greater promise or potential peril. And this potential period is related to the abilities that are required to participate in this new world, to some transformation of all kinds of activities on the economic sector, on the government sector, on the training sector, on the universities. So science will be strongly influenced by that. And in the role of this transformation is what we call the fourth industrial revolution. This fourth technological revolution is intensively transforming society, economy, production, business models. And this is a picture that represents what we have on the first industrial revolution in the 80s. Traditional introduction of mechanical production, and also the second with the Industrial Revolution, electricity, automation, and now the connection, the cyber and physics connections. This is revolutionary. Everything, every kind of activity has been influenced and will be even more influenced by that. So what should we do about that? Those disruptive innovations are supported by this exponential growth of the technologies. All the technologies, the more important technologies, are just growing as exponential behavior, although, of course, they do not go to the sky. They will be supplied, and they will be substituted by new technology in a very, very, very high speed. And some of those technologies are listed here that will be dominating: artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, Internet of Things, advanced materials, nanomaterials, and their convergence, neurotechnology, virtual and augmented reality, biotechnology, synthetic biology. Those are the most important technologies. And because of these scenarios, is that we had very clear that we need to have a strategy to know where we should go, what kind of investment we should do, what are the possibilities that we have. We have some restrictions, very strong restrictions on financing our development. We have restrictions on financing our education. And so what we should do to face this tremendous transformation in a state that has so many traditional problems like poverty, like inequality, like low level of education. We have to choose our future. We have to choose our pathway. So we decide to establish and develop a new strategy. And the strategy is a document. This document has a set of guidelines to face those challenges and a sense of urgency. We cannot wait. We cannot just sit on the table and wait for things to happen. You have to be very proactive. All of you have to be a proactive person. Of course, it has to be taken not only by government, by enterprise, by company, by academy, and also by society. So this is a big transformation, and we need to know where we are in terms of science and technology. Our scientific base is in Pernambuco. We have about 115 graduate programs where we train PhD and master people. We have 8,000 researchers, 5,600 doctors, 1.3 research groups, and about 500 research groups that interact with firms. Those are numbers from Pernambuco. I would say that in terms of researchers and PhD, we have the same relative size of our economy. We are not greater and not below this level. We have also a very interesting phenomenon that happened during these last 15 years. This is the distribution of the main institutions of science and technology. I mean, universities, federal institutes, Embrapa, and all these picked points here, they represent one of those technology centers. All of those in the countryside did not exist before 2004. Most of them were concentrated in this region here. That was a very important policy to interiorization of this infrastructure. And in this region here of Petrolina, Univasf is one of those results. But also the campus of the Federal University of Pernambuco, Federal University Rural of Pernambuco, the technology center from the industries like Senai. They used to be just on the board in Recife, but now we have a much better distribution of universities. That means that we have a better distribution of young people with adequate training, because to enter on those schools, you have to be at least at a level of master degree. So it's starting to change the face of the state. But in some of indicators that are important for us to face the new revolution, in my opinion, one of the most important is the training of professionals in STEM plus C, science, technology, and engineering, and mathematics, what we call the STEM workforce for the fourth industrial revolution. And in this case, we are not very well, because this is the position of Brazil in 2015, the number of enrollments in these areas at the undergraduate level per 100,000 inhabitants is only about 800. If you take a look at the state of Pernambuco, we are below even the Northeast region. So this is a challenge. So we are increasing, and we created a program to incentive this kind of activity. We have a graduate program, about 4% of the total number of graduate programs of Brazil. As I mentioned to you, a little bit higher than our economy compared to Brazil. And those graduate programs, we have a challenge, an urgent challenge to improve the quality by CAPS indicators, and this CAPS is our agency that established the level of the graduate programs. The highest level is the number 7, and today we don't have any 7 program, although we had before. We have just 8 of those programs in level 6. So the majority is in this level. So we have to make it better. In terms of research groups, the distribution by field, we can see that we have a very high concentration of research groups in the areas of human science, health science, engineering, computing, agriculture, and what we call exact science, that's physics, chemistry, mathematics. We are very small fraction of this. So it's related to the STEM workforce, of course. And so we need to change that. This is by the scientific base. But also we have to look at the industrial base to see how the strategy should work and how we should orient our financing activities. And it's very interesting, because if you have a representation of the industrial sectors in our state, we could identify that we have a very strong base of entrepreneurial activities people that has some economic activity, but in a very, very, very low technology level. We call this is a basis that we should look for innovation as an inclusive device. So innovation, inclusion by innovation is one of our targets. We have some segments that are less intensive in technology. We have a new economy that was brought to Pernambuco. They are more intensive in technology, like the petroleum and gas, the transport and the automobile industry, and also an information technology center. You have a very dynamic tech park in Recife in the area of information technology that's recognized as one of the best in Brazil and an important one in the world. And we have here some, quite few, but clusters that are future-oriented, like the automobile industry, the plant from the Fiat in Chrysler in Goiânia City is already a representation of for industrial revolution. We have a lot of automation or a lot of integration between men and machines. So this is very complex environment for an innovation policy that requires different approaches. If you deal with inclusion by technology, if you deal with these traditional industrial segments, and if you deal with the more productive and sophisticated technology cluster. But even though the innovative effort of those companies still are focused on development of product and process that already exist in the market. So they're not too much innovation-oriented. The new and more technology-intensive sector of the economy demand more skilled jobs. So we have what you call a system of innovation. We have 2 funding agencies to promote innovation. We have 10 private research and development center. This is very new in our system because from the last years we did not have anyone, just any private research and development center. You have 10 already in our state. They were very incentivized by the presence of the Global Research Center from Fiat Chrysler, that came together with the company. So we have here in Petrolina, the Monsanto as a branch of research and development, but very unconnected with the whole university system. It's very interesting. It's a challenge in Brazil to put those agencies more close, to work more close. So we have incubators, accelerators, research labs, public research labs, public research companies, National Institute of Science and Technology, you have 10. Those are the most important research centers in Brazil from excellence of science. And we are home of 8 of those institutes. And we have 7 universities that do research. But this system is still very, the degree of integration is very low. Many of those institutions work by themselves with no interaction. And this is a challenge for our strategy, how to promote these interactions. Because the flow of knowledge and innovation only happen if you put all together. The industry, the university, government, because as I was talking to Professor Alinando, he cannot have a prototype that's been developed, but nothing happened. Why? The patent is not taken care of by the university. The industry don't look at that as an innovation. The investors are not coming to this environment. Our investors are very conservative, the private investors, I mean. Differently from the developed country where the high technology is very spurring everything because they also have investors. They are looking everywhere where they have good ideas. Many of the good ideas of our university lab they are lost because we don't have a very virtuous cycle to promote that. But anyway, we have important actors in our innovation system. And I just call attention here from those universities, the 7 universities, for those research centers. There is some of those are in the countryside, especially, for instance, as I mentioned, with the Monsanto, but also this institution here is also a very interesting example that is possible to have research that it tem. It's a research center that's linked to the most important battery company of Brazil. This battery company is responsible for more than 50% of all battery in the automobile industry in Brazil. It's Moura. And they created 5 years ago a new research center. They are in the countryside, and they are already working with more than 40 researchers. So it's possible to do that. And they have very strong links with other companies abroad and also with universities. So it's not the question of some people like to say that geography is a destiny. We don't agree with that. We need to change the opportunities to face the geography. Geography brings us opportunities. We are here in a very dry land area. We are having a lot of investment in solar and wind energy for the last 5 years. There is a room for improvement on those technologies. It's not the diffusion of the technology. It's a new adventure for those that are involved with energy production. This is also an interesting picture of the heterogeneous of our industrial and technology basis. This is a real pictures. We're not creating fantasy on this. This is a part of the laboratory at the Innovation Center for Advanced Manufacturing. They're trying to introduce automation and robotics for the companies, even for the traditional sectors. This is a traditional lab. This is a part of the Fiat company. This is the place where the information technology is taking place with the park there, called Porto Digital. Most of the students from the University of Federal Pernambuco are creating business in this environment. Many companies from outside are just establishing this region. They have incentives, they have funding, they have people, well-trained people, and they create a new environment already for the last 15 years. This is the technology park that you are orienting that for the new challenge of the fourth revolution, for industrial revolution with manufacturing. And this is a representation of also the real world. This is activity associated with the garment industry. A lot of small companies, but they employ a lot of people, but can be a great opportunity if we improve the level of technology. If we improve the way of doing business, the new business model with technological platforms that bring what is produced here in a better level of production by design, by introduction of new machines. So this is a whole picture that shows that we are interested in the perspective on a strategy where you should take in consideration this diversity. So you want in our strategy to promote conditions to greater competitiveness of our state, to favor the social transformation, elevation, quality of life, and prosperity, basically on knowledge, learning, and innovation. That's what we want. So we establish 6 central axes to develop actions. It has to do with generation of wealth, social benefits, create, diffuse, and absorb knowledge. We have to develop talent and creativity. We have to promote the digital transformation of society, the diffusion of those technology. We have to accelerate the innovation of an economic activity. We have to cooperate, to transfer, and to generate this technology. We have to take into consideration the environmental challenges that are global but are also local, and a responsibility with this kind of development that we want to face. How we will get there? So we are selecting some areas, some programs, some projects, and we are already implemented that. The one is related to the culture of innovation that is very low in our state, in our country. We still are a country that invests less than 1.1% of our gross domestic product in science and technology and innovation. We need to invest much more. So we need to create a culture where this is not just a government purpose. It's not only government responsibility. Our companies also has to be involved with the financing of science and technology. We need to expand our scientific base of excellence. We need to create and develop and encourage the innovation infrastructure in advanced manufacturing, in IoT, artificial intelligence, material science, and data science and technology. We need to create more startups and make them scale-ups. We need to attract research private centers. We need to expand our innovation habitats. That's the place where you have incubators, you have accelerators, you have the business involvement with the activities. And we need to expand our connectivity. We start a very important program right now to connect all the state institutions that deal with science and technology and education. By the end of this year, we will have about 400 institutions connected in between 10 and 100 gigabytes. Support for inclusive innovation and develop what you call innovative territories and knowledge alliance. And we have a very good infrastructure in the legal size to make that possible. This is an example of what we're calling the territorially based action format. We are developing some innovative territories where we identify spaces, territories, where you have economic activity, you have universities, you have research centers, and try to promote links between those institutions and make each one of this region a kind of statement of proposal, putting together to develop what we call the local system of innovation. So we are already selecting 4 of those experiences with investment from BID, funded by this international bank and by the Brazilian government, the federal government. And one of those areas is here, is connected with the question of production of wine and fruits, but looking for the future of the intelligent agriculture. And intelligent agriculture will demand information technology, it will demand material science, it will demand biotechnology, and everything that you'll be facing in this conference. And we've been presented to this conference that Professor Shoma is ahead in this, in terms of, in worldwide terms, that is sensors. Chemical sensors. They are one of the most important devices for us to promote the agriculture in a new basis. That is intelligent agriculture, where you connect things with internet, but you need to have the support from the material science and technology. So these are the areas where we've been working with. This kind of milk production, garment. Here is the energy sector and also some traditional materials that we are working. But we understand and believe that those alliances will only happen with cooperation. With cooperation, ideas, and more rapidly transformed innovation and value, and that we need to know. The implementation of the strategy is already taking place, and the main instrument for this is our funding agency that belongs to our secretary, that's FACEP, is already supporting most of the labs in this region, funding agency and support research, scholarship for training people, retention of highly qualified human resources. We need to keep those people here, Professor. This is a big challenge. How to keep people like Alenando, like Mateus, and like many others that are here working here for the purpose of the local development, but connected with the world. We need to have people in the highest level, training the best schools worldwide. Also, FACEP is funding the research and promoting events, funding innovation in enterprises, for instance, promoting the startup, emergence of new startups from universities. And also, the FACEP is involved with the public demand in some strategic orders or demand. We need to establish partnership between different levels of government. We cannot do that by ourselves alone. We need to have a very close relationship with the federal government, state government, municipality. The municipality has to be involved with this also too. Partnership between government and productive sector, that is companies. Companies should be more close to universities, and the universities should change the way they face the working together with companies, because if you don't change some of the regulations, some of the culture within the universities, we cannot also face this problem and this challenge. And an adequate governance that we have to take into consideration the complexity of the innovation system with so many different actors, so many different demands, and also the sectorial and territorial diversity. Those are the challenges that we're facing in our strategy. We are moving ahead with that because we strongly believe that we will only be successful as a state, as a country, if we integrate all the people in the state of development. So we should be what we call locally inspired, take into consideration the whole diversity of our territory, of our people, our culture, but globally connected. And being globally connected means that we need to have this kind of event, this kind of activity very frequently in our environment, in our university. So congratulations for all of you that are here on a Saturday morning to sit there and to watch some conferences, but I hope that it will bring for us some insights to reflect what kind of future I should look for me, what kind of future I should look for my family, my city, my state. Because if you don't do that, we'll just be in a position to watch the future go through. And we'll be just spectators. And we don't want to be spectators. We want to be some protagonists of those future. And that's why you need to have very clear strategy and policy to conduct us together for the better future. That's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucia, for your talk. We have time for questions. Professor Swagger.
So you mentioned translation from university, very key, and it's nice we're at a university. One thing that's a growing trend in the U.S. is that there's the valley of death between the laboratory at the university and industry, and incubators and other funding mechanisms really are there. I didn't hear the term incubator, but I'm sure you think about these things.
Yes, we do have. Maybe I was not very clear. We have incubators here, many incubators. We have in our tech park, it's called Porto Digital, maybe the most important, but we have in many different universities they created incubators. There is a law in Brazil that all the university needs to have we call the innovation nucleus. This did not evolve because this does not work by decree, just by law. It has to, other actors has to be involved. But the incubator is already exists in Brazil for many years. Also, what you call the accelerators that are a new stage. When a small company starts from the university, they already have some opportunities not to develop the product, but they have support to go to the market by training of the people around, providing meetings between the entrepreneur and the funding people. This is the weakest part of it because we don't have too many investors. The venture capitalists is still very weak in Brazil. This is one of the challenges. So we are creating a program to promote what we call the seed funding. So the government comes together with some investor and select some small companies to support their development. So I don't know if in Petrolina you have already incubator. I did not hear about that in Petrolina. But in many of those, even in the countryside, since Serra Talhada has one, and the most of those incubators are in Recife, our capital. But they exist. But the depth of Vale, Valley of Death, here is deeper than yours and wider, because the steps that a startup company has to face are much more complicated. Some of those some of the ideas do not even transform themselves in a startup. Many cases of devices that are developed within labs at the universities, and nothing happened. The patent office is very inefficient. It takes 8 years in average to give you a patent recognition. So it's a very important activity, but still very small. But we have this.
More questions?
You said that 65% of the children in primary school will work in jobs that doesn't even exist yet. So I would like to know how can universities and schools change their way to... They have to change themselves to teach in a different way so the children can be, different than these different jobs.
Yeah, we are talking very strongly with people from the education sector for them to understand that, because the traditional way of teaching, the traditional school is not going to work. What you call the development, what you call the hyperculture, new abilities to deal with many different dimensions of activities. In engineering, cannot just be an engineer that can calculate an structure. They need to have other abilities to interact, to work collectively, to try to make their minds a different way. Because if the school will not follow the attendance, people will do by themselves. And this is very bad. And it has to do with many technology, but also with the concepts of training people and forming people. It's not only the technology, but technology plays a very, very crucial role in this. If the child, very young child, can get any electronic equipment and device and work very easily with all this, with video and demand, with connectivity. So if you don't face this revolution and try to make the concept of education a different way, we have a very high risk, yes. But it's a it's a general phenomenon. It's not only our phenomenon, but we are in a even worse position because we need to train much more. Our professor, our math teachers, for instance, they are very out of what's going on, you know. So I read very recently a report in England that the most important focus will be the training of math and science in the very young people, because they just don't want to be just users of those technology. All the algorithms that have been developed, they demand a lot of math, a lot of people with a mind that's oriented to this kind of thinking, way of thinking. So it's really a challenge for educators also. Any other question?
Okay, more one question.
If you are interested in reading the document, I left here the site. I suggest the students to visit our page, take the document, and take a look on it, because this is written in Portuguese. We have much more data than I could present here. And I'll be, if you have any question or if you want to ask or make some suggestion, all the suggestion will be very helpful, and I'll be very delighted to have a connection with any one of you.
Let's do thank you again. Thank you, Lúcia.
Eu só vou ter que pedir desculpas porque eu vou ter que sair, porque o governador está aqui hoje em Petrolina e eu preciso me juntar lá à equipe com os outros secretários. I apologize, I have to leave right now. I already told you, but I will meet you later. Thank you very much. Congratulations for your work.
Thank you. Now I'd like to present our next speaker, Professor Celso Melo. He's a doctor in physics from University of California, Santa Barbara, and postdoc at MIT. He coordinates the group of non-conventional polymers at Federal University of Pernambuco, and his work involves the multidisciplinarity in the frontier of science, in physics, chemistry, biology, and material science. Celso is a member of Brazilian Science Academy and is a reference for all of us Brazilian scientists. Particularly, I entered in the science by the Celso's hands 20 years ago, and I'd like to say that it's an honor to receive Celso in this event. It is extremely symbolic, the presence of Professor Timothy Swagger, Professor Celso Melo here, because it's an important moment in which we have the convergence of different point of views about the nanobiotechnology. Then I'd like to thank again the presence of Professor Celso Melo in our event. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Following the script, I will speak in English, but I realized that especially for the students, is a kind of a new experience. So I would like to incentivize that you participate, and if you have any questions, it doesn't need to be at the end of the talk. Even during, you can interrupt me, and if you have any problem to ask in English, ask in Portuguese. I speak Portuguese, so I can help and translate. So let's do it in a very informal way, okay? Bom, I'll say the same thing in Portuguese now. Bom, eu suponho que todo mundo entendeu o que eu acabei de falar, mas para aqueles que não entenderam, por favor, informal. Se tiver alguma dúvida, quiserem perguntar mesmo durante a palestra, levante o braço. Se tiver dificuldade de falar inglês, fale em português, eu traduzo, certo? Vamos tornar a coisa bastante informal. Okay, so I would like to start thanking Elinando for the opportunity to be here. It's always a pleasure to see Univasf, how this university has grown and modernized in the last 10 years. And also to see Elinando's lab, and there is a famous disc in that university is people, people, people before money and labs. And seeing Elinado work, I realized that's true. Really, the energy and the talent of Elinado made all the difference, and it's always a pleasure to be here and see how well things are going along. Okay. I'll talk today about biological use of conducting polymers. As Elinado mentioned, I work for several years in conducting polymers. I suppose that not all the students here are familiar with conducting polymers, so I will start discussing a little bit, a review in 3 or 4 slides, what the conducting polymers are. And one of the lines of research in my lab, the interface with biology, that's happening almost by accident, and I hope to explain at the end how those things will fit together. So, conducting polymers. Usually, I belong to a generation where we say, okay, it's safe to play with plastics because plastics do not conduct electricity. You never get electric shock working with a plastic. That's not true anymore. And in the 70s, this trio is a more complicated story, but at the end, the 3 of them, after maybe 20 years of suggestion that maybe organic molecules could have interesting electrical properties, they realized that polyacetylene, one typical organic polymer, could be induced to present a high conductivity. That all came as a surprise for some, and people start to realize that something new was happening. In the year 2000, the 3 of them got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry because of this landmark discovery. And the whole idea is that the conductivity in conducting polymers is different from metallic conduction, where you have free electrons that move on, or a typical semiconductor as silicon, because here what the key role is played by conformational defects that move along the conjugated chain. A little bit more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. So it's a new class of materials, a new class of science that had to be investigated, of course, new possible practical applications. Of course, things are well understood now in terms of the electronic band structure of the polymers. The idea that conformational defects introduce levels in the band gap, and since those levels are associated with mobile defects that can move around, these can transfer charge, spin, and so on, depending on the material. So there was a fever in the following decade, and in less than 10 years, several polymers were discovered that share with polyacetylene these properties of conduction electricity. Some of them very old. For example, polyaniline was discovered, was synthesized in the 19th century during the German chemical revolution of dyes and so on. But people never realized that this was a conducting polymer. Only after the realization that polyacetylene was a very special polymer. And the whole idea, as I have shown, that for the general class of polymers, you need to have what we call bipolarum. You have to have a special kind of defect that can move around and transporting the charge, spin, and so on. So this is well established, almost. There are a lot of things that we don't understand yet, as usual. But the main thing was understood at the time, and a lot of practical applications. Initially, people thought about batteries, but now you know that organic batteries and smart windows, organic LEDs, probably you have in your house a TV based on OLEDs or your cell phone screen or so on, and the promise that organic solar cells will become economically competitive. So there is a race on to put this in the market. So at the time of the Nobel Prize, they had already, in the 25 years since the discovery, a well-established technological branch. So conducting polymers is a very fascinating field in terms of science, in terms of practical application, and so on. What has to do with biology? So I will start by the sidelines. We decided to work with composites using conducting polymers, that was our main subject of interest, with metal oxides, metallic nanoparticles, and so on. And look for the properties to try to understand the physics, to understand the spectroscopic properties, and if possible, to look for possible applications. And water contamination is a big problem worldwide, but especially in our region, Northeast region, in Pernambuco state. And we, a few years ago, started to look at the possibility of using conducting polymers in the form of nanocomposites of membranes to remove water contaminants. To make a long story short, I will classify in different types. Heavy metal ions is a big problem. The presence of dyes is a problem in Pernambuco state because we have a textile industry with a lot of contaminants, and the contaminants are let on the rivers without previous treatment. So it's a very important problem. People say in that region that the color of the river is the color of the fashion. So you know what's the trend for the fashion in the next summer? Look at the color of the river now. It's blue. The jeans will be blue in a couple of months, and so on. Biological contamination by bacteria, algae, and toxins, and also the molecules like hormones, pesticides. There is, you probably have heard, the feminilization of the world. A lot of estrogen and female hormones are being let on the environment. So I started to discuss the possibility of using nanocomposites to remove metal ions. This was the work, a PhD work of Alicia. And we have been able to prepare magnetite polyaniline and polypyrrole composites that were able to remove metals like chromium from water in a very efficient way. The whole idea is to make everything simple. Since the core of the composite is magnetic, you can use a magnet to implement the physical separation. So I won't give you the details unless you are really interested, but we have been able to prove two things. First, we could get a very efficient removal, and also the system was able to desorb. So you can recycle and use once again at least 15 times without loss of the qualities. And we have tested this, of course, is a function of pH. We optimize the pH for copper, chromium, and so on. And we learn a lot. The most important thing is that we learn a lot with this work. And I'll show you how this could be applied for biological systems with some modifications. So we examined this. We got a high efficiency, both at high and low concentrations, in a very short time. Could be used in several consecutive cycles. And when we compare with the literature, we have been able to show that our system is very competitive, not only in terms of the capacity of removal capacity, but also is friendly because it works in the almost neutral pH, that's an advantage, and also in terms of the time to reach saturation, to remove the most of the capacity. So we published the paper, Alicia got her PhD, and we learned a lot that's important. That was the paper that was published related to the work. And maybe you recognize this guy here, Haribi, who also did his PhD in my lab. I was blessed by a group of Mexican students who came to Brazil a few years ago, and several of them ended up in my lab. It was a pleasure to have them, and I have to thank Mexican government for sending those students to Brazil. Some of them are back to Mexico, of course. But it was a pleasure to have this collaboration. Very good, very bright guys. Anyway, we decided to look in a different way. Instead of using nanocomposites, try to impregnate our conductive polymers in a membrane to prepare a kind of fabric that you can use as a filtering system to remove contaminants. And to give you just the basic results, we got interesting results that were published related to the polyaniline polystyrene fiber. Those fibers, you can visit Elinando's lab, for example, were prepared by using the electrospinning technique. For those of you who are not familiar, you prepare a solution, you have a syringe, and you apply a high tension, high voltage, and then the solvent evaporates, and you get a thread, you get a fiber of the polyaniline polystyrene in this case, and you collect this as a membrane. It's a very simple and very effective way to prepare those materials. Of course, you have to it's not several months to adjust the system, but once you learn, it works very well. It's very reproducible results. You cannot see the image here, but you can optimize the quality of the fiber in terms of the microstructure of the fiber. That's a challenge to be done, but anyway, we have shown that it's also possible to remove heavy metal ions using those membranes. One side advantage is that, in some sense, not as much as you would wish at first, but also you can have this as a kind of sensor, because the color of the membrane after capture reveals the type of ion that was removed. So you can use this as a simple way to identify the contaminant. We got a patent for this. We applied for a patent. In Brazil, patents take 15 years to be approved. But anyway, the patent was filed, and we are waiting for the analysis. Anyway, of course, patents are just a piece of paper unless some company wants to explore the intellectual properties. And we published a paper related to this work, and students were trained, something important, and knowledge was advanced. And also, we decided to use those composites, but incorporated porphyrin. Porphyrin is a photoactive molecule that releases oxygen radicals, and those oxygen radicals can photoinactivate bacteria. In this paper, we show that we are able to inhibit the growth of bacteria by exposing the membrane to solar radiation. It's an interesting idea that we plan to have a further use later. Also, following the same line, we decided to look for the possibility of using those membranes to remove dye molecules. As I told you, it's a big health and social problem in Pernambuco. And we choose to use a prototype dye, Congo Red, that has this bright reddish color. It contaminates the water bodies. And the same idea. We use a membrane, we incorporate polyaniline, incorporate aniline and make the polymerization. We got those fibers, and that's the structure. You have been able to show that you can remove, again, at a neutral, almost neutral pH. That's a good thing. In terms of interaction times, competitive, and you can see the progressive change of color. You can have in a kind of closed circuit to shorten the time of interaction. And you can see that in 25 minutes, you get we go from this color to this almost clear solution. Of course, there is the challenge of the best optimal configuration to use. This is something that, of course, if there is a practical application, when someone wants to implement this as a possibility, we could look at this problem. But again, we learn a lot doing this. You plan to use this in other systems. So far, I haven't talked about biological applications, but I want to get there. And now look for removal of bacteria. Is it possible to use the same composites or the same membranes we have used to remove heavy metal ions, to remove dye molecules, to remove bacteria, even further, to remove and identify the type of bacteria that's present in the solution? That's a part of the work that's in progress now. A new generation of students in postdocs in my lab. And so you have three challenges: removal, identification, that we propose with a rapid diagnosis test that we, for reasons that I explained in a short time, called Elinor test, and also photo inactivation, as Harib's work has shown that's possible. So we look first, before going to the removal of bacteria, I'll take a shortcut discussing DNA separation. Remember those polyaniline iron oxide nanocomposites that you have used to remove metal ions? We tune up a little bit and look at the problem of DNA separation. Now we are looking for biological molecules. And the idea was the same. The idea is that if you have DNA in solution, you can use those magnetic nanocomposites, trap the molecules. Since it's magnetic, you can easily separate. And if you wish, in biological samples, not always desired, you can recycle the nanocomposites again to use again. But to avoid contaminants, that's something that you just do for benchmark, but it's not, we don't think that's very appropriate in general case. Anyway, things work very well. That was the work of Juan Medina. And we have been able to show that this system works very well. The magnetic properties were well established, because of the iron oxide core. And the interaction time was very short. And when you compare to available methods in the literature, we see a lot of advantage in our system in terms of time, the yield, and the purity of the material. And also, as I showed you, we tested the desorption. It worked very well. And so we could control this if we need. Of course, but it's something that, suppose we want to do analysis like those the biotechnology, a PCR. If you release, even if you are not going to use the nanocomposite, but we eliminate a contaminant for the following steps. So it's important to have the possibility of trapping the molecule and then release the molecule. The point is that we did that in a model system. Can you use this for a real sample, like let's say blood sample? We test this. The answer was yes. This is original blood sample. The students volunteered to donate the blood. And at that time, I didn't have the facilities in my lab. The students went to Belo Horizonte to work at the Fiocruz in Belo Horizonte to do those tests, but everything worked very well. And we have been able to establish a new protocol for DNA extraction that's very advantageous to the methods present, the current methods in the market. First of all, we don't use nice chemicals, toxic solvents, and so on, because of the magnet. We can reduce the time from 2 hours to less than 45 minutes. And we get mostly high yield, high purity of the final material. We check this for electrophoresis, and so we propose a new kit, nanomag, a new kit. Of course, the intellectual property, we got a patent, As a matter of fact, we had patents. We published, we got patents in Brazil, and we applied for patents in the US. And we made all the tests in terms of electrophoresis that confirm the competitiveness of this method. So we have now a simple protocol for fast DNA extraction for whole blood samples. You have been used this in different situations, always very successful. And as a matter of fact, when the patents were going to expire, a company in Minas Gerais state, Nanomark, was a venture capital, a capitalist decided to, as a matter of fact, Nanomark was established as a small company to exploit the intellectual properties of the things we have done in our lab. And the first product they plan to put in the market, if I present this 8 months ago, here will be 2016. They promised that to put in the market in 2016. They now plan to put in the market in 2017. So that's internal problems of production. It's being produced with our technology in Belo Horizonte. But this is the second version of the product. That's this kit that will be competitive for using in biotechnology labs for different samples. So the idea is that once you learn to do DNA separation, to work on the possibility of do RNA separation and also proteins and other biological molecules. So you have a pipeline of challenges in your lab, and we look to alternative formulation of the nanocomposites, the possibility of using membranes for the capture of proteins. So this was the master work of Bruna, and we decided to incorporate chitosan in our sample to improve some of the properties. We have been successful. I don't want to bother you with the details, but we got improvement in the yield of adsorption, in the time, and also in the purity of the material. So it seems that for certain situations, this formulation can improve, and now this is for DNA adsorption. We like to see if possible to do this, not in the form of nanocomposites, but in form of membranes, using those membranes like those that Haribi has worked in his. And this was also the master work of Winnie. And also we have been able to show that this membrane, prepared by electric spinning, polyester polyaniline, can be adapted to removal of DNA. Also with very efficiency in terms of time, purity, and so on. And so we got a paper, we published that. I don't have the image. I was looking, but this slide is not here. Anyway, this was published, and so we learned a little bit more. And now we decided to look at the possibility of capture of proteins. And that was also the master work of Rubenia. And we look now, it's a very important field in the pharmaceutical industry, the separation of proteins, IgG and others, is a very expensive method. Brazil does not have the technology, has to import everything. And so it would be nice to have a native technology that would be competitive. We work in that direction. So we use this for protein separation purification. Of course, we are working with IgG right now, but Rubenia's work, we use model system like BSA. And the important thing is that we have been able to show that it works. We have been able to show that those polymeric membranes could be used to remove not only contaminants from water, but also biological molecules like DNA and proteins. So as a matter of fact, it's a work in progress, and we learn a lot. And I think that's have a promising venue in the years ahead. Now I go close to biological system, going to that idea. How to capture bacteria. I was surprised a few years ago talking to director of a large hospital in Recife, talking about possible applications of this, to learn that the gold standard for urinary infection nowadays is culture. In other words, this hospital is for prenatal patients, the mother and the child, the baby. A lot of a high percentage of urinary infections. If there is a suspected case, they have to have in bed for 3 days, waiting for the culture to provide the results. 2 to 3 days. If we had a faster method that, let's say, reduce this for 5 hours, would be a big advantage. So that's the challenge that, for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, we decided to face. First of all, we had to look at the possibility of identify the bacteria. To identify the bacteria, we had to capture the bacteria. So it's possible to use all the things we have learned in the last few years to this problem, to remove the bacteria. If yes, how to accomplish this? If the bacteria was removed, can we identify the type? This is the work in progress. That's the PhD work of Romário. He's completing his second year in PhD, but he has very nice results. And I show you here that the first question is yes. You can use those magnetic composites to trap the bacteria and remove using an external magnetic field, and then you can confine and increase the concentration of the bacteria. That improves the linear of detection of a sample, because you have a very diluted sample, you can improve the concentration, and then your further test could be more reliable. So the first question is yes. I'll show you. We had decided, of course, to work with Escherichia coli because of the interest in urinary infection. You can see the turbidity of the sample before and after. Of course, this is not urine. This is a sample prepared by ourselves. We got the bacteria, we grew the bacteria and did the test. So this is under control. So now we have a protocol, not for capturing DNA, but for capturing the bacteria, following similar steps. And it's important to learn. I don't know how many of you are from the biological area, so those of you that are in the biological area know this better than me, so I apologize for if I am not expert on this, but why bacteria is so efficient in mutating and adapting to environments? Because different for us, a superior organism, the DNA of bacteria is not only the chromosomic DNA. They have also the extra chromosomic, that's the plasmid DNA. And this one, they can exchange with the other bacteria laterally, not only vertical mother to child, but also if a bacteria is resistant to antibiotic, for example, it can pass this information to the other bacteria, and not only to following the hereditary line, but also the same bacteria in the middle. This is the plasmid DNA, and that's responsible for the effectiveness of bacteria of adapting to the different environments. So we concentrate in capturing the plasmid DNA, capturing the bacteria, and then capturing the plasmid DNA. So, first step, we have been able to capture the bacteria. Now we promote the lysis of the bacteria, of the wall. We expose the DNA, and using the technology we have used so far, we have been able to get the plasmid DNA. So, first step was accomplished. The second step also. Now we have been able, of course, in controlled samples, to capture the bacteria, Escherichia coli, to break the membrane cell of the cell, and to extract the DNA. The important thing is we did that with high efficiency. And how to compare this to other methods? So we decided to compare with methods in the market. This is a commercial product. I suppose from here, the kit is here, Voisan Plus, the Promega, from Promega, and that's our composite. We get a higher or comparable, if you wish, yield, but with higher purity. So the preliminary results show that we are in the right track. Also, this is nothing of this was published yet. It's a work in progress. But also, Romário has very promising results using a different type of composite with polythiophene, and gives even more impressive yield of capture. So you can compare the present, our present technology with the one that's under preliminary. So we have to repeat this, repeat until to make sure. So then we face the third challenge. What's the third challenge? The third challenge is you capture the bacteria, you extract the DNA, and how to identify that this is Escherichia coli and not something else. Then I come to the final part, what we call the Eleanor test. To do this, I have to discuss the Eleanor effect. Almost 10 years ago, we decided to look at nanocomposites of conducting polymers and noble metal nanoparticles like gold, silver, and so on. And we prepared this using wet chemistry methods, and we realized something strange. We get a high fluorescence that was not present in the original metal nanoparticle, not in the polymer. But there is a synergetic, the way we prepare, there is a synergetic interaction between the conducting polymer. We get improvement in terms of luminescence of 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. That was the work of, PhD work of Renata. And we published this a few years ago. And we have been able to establish that this is not something peculiar for this system, but if you match different metallic nanoparticles with different conducting polymers, you get this same effect that we call Eleanor. I didn't define Eleanor here. Anyway, it's a cross of high luminescence, enhanced luminescence of organic and inorganic origin, because we believe that the synergetic interaction is important. Anyway, we test for those systems. We have been able to play around. We control the intensity of emission and so on. Now we can go to the Eleanor test. What's the idea? At first we thought we were using Eleanor effect in displays, because we've been able to get a luminescence in the deep blue part of the spectrum. That's something interesting by itself. But then I realized that there was a large literature in the use of conducting polymers to interact with DNA. And the idea is very simple. I hope to show you here. I'll go. As you say, you know, DNA has the phosphate groups in the edge. So in chemical terms, you can understand as a polyanionic chain. And our conducting polymers can be doped to have positive charge. So if you expose these, they try to form a false triple helix, or if you open this, they form a double helix, non-specific of course, between a single chain DNA and the conducting polymer. So the whole idea is to exploit this interaction, non-specific interaction, between a single DNA to form false or double helix with our conducting polymers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of primer, but it's amazing because, of course, you know that DNA has all the information about organism. And what distinguishes a dog from a cat, of course, specific DNA. But what make people different one of the other is because they have a fragment of DNA that's specific of that individual. And you have DNA that's specific of that species. you can use those specific fragments of DNA to make the identification of individuals, or to make the identification of species. So this is what people in biotech calls the primer, because the initial step in the PCR protocol. Anyway, the whole idea is to use this exquisite sensitivity, specificity of the DNA to develop a fast test. Before doing that, we decided to make a detour to make sure that we understood the interaction. So we used the electric impedance spectroscopy to examine for this interaction. That was part of the PhD work of Sandro. And we have investigated using the electric spectroscopy, the interaction, have been able to establish the optimal conditions in terms of pH, concentration, and so on, to get this interaction between the polyaniline chains and DNA molecules. So we understood this. This was a kind of sidetrack that was interesting anyway. So we decided to develop the Eleanor test. So the idea is that using the primer, as I introduced, the amazing thing I was telling is that if someone had asked me a few years ago, okay, this is the concept of fragment. How big is the fragment? I would say enormous. That's not. Usually, you can use biostatistics and locate these fragments typically of the order of 20 nucleotides. It's a very small fragment of the chain that contains the specific information of the individual or of the species you are looking for. So the whole idea is to use this primer. That's something that you can synthesize or you can buy for a company, and as a kind of hook to trap the desired DNA. So that's the whole idea of the test. Let's say, specific case, we work with the human papilloma virus. That's a very prevalent disease in Pernambuco, or leishmania. You use the primer of the disease you are investigating. Fix this in the substrate. Easier to talk than to have been playing with this for several years, improving and so on. But anyway, you get this anchor in the surface. Now you bring the sample with the DNA of interest. You hit the sample to make single chain DNA, and you put. In the case of positive test, the hook would trap the DNA. In the case of negative, there's no complementarity, you trap anything. And then you put your fluorescent nanocomposite. The fluorescent nanocomposite will interact with the DNA, would make this a blob, fluorescent blob. You use running water, the running water will take away all the loose molecules in the negative case. And not all molecules, because in the positive case, some of them will be trapped. I'll give you real images. You can see the difference between the positive case and the negative case. And this can be done, this final step can be done in less than 10 minutes. That's why we believe that we have a proposal of a fast diagnostic test. We have investigated this for different diseases so far. The main characteristic is that we have a fast, because 10 minutes, plus 1 to 2 hours of extraction of genomic material. But I have shown you that I can reduce this using the other idea to less than 45 minutes. It's of a molecular nature, not a serological, so you are looking for the DNA molecule. And as a matter of fact, it's a platform, because you change the primer, you change the disease you are investigating. Low cost, and does not require specialized personnel. The whole idea is to make as simple as possible to be used in primary points of care. So we have results, and of course, all tests, doesn't matter what you are, not biological, all tests, they have a number of positive cases and a number of negative cases, because you have a shadow area of cases of false positive and false negative. The whole idea is to make this as narrow as possible, to have less negative, false negative or less false positive. Of course, there are several parameters that you can measure this. the Renata thesis, we work with the first, platform, cyanide glass slides, and you use for different diseases, like HPV-18, that's the most dangerous subtype of human papillomavirus, can cause cervical cancer in men and women. And those images are from real positive and negative samples, a work of Renata, and the preliminary results show that the sensibility and specificity, those are related to the number of false positives and false negatives. So how confident we are. The only rapid diagnosis test available in the market for HPV is a serological test from Qiagen called CAR-HPV. And our system is of a molecular nature. Here you can say this belongs to a dangerous subtype. Here you can say this is specific subtype. And we start in a very competitive way. We plan to improve this. And for leishmania, the same thing was true. In Brazil, we applied this in the field because leishmania is a big problem because they suppose in Petrolina area also, in the certain area of the northeast region, certainly is a problem because the domestic dog is a repository, is a vector of the disease. Anyway, Fiocruz, that the Brazilian health ministry, used this French, from Pasteur Institute, rapid diagnosis test. It's a serological. But you see the sensibility of the order of 66 in the field is a little bit less than 60%. It's almost like throwing a coin. As a matter of fact, you have a problem because if the dog is diagnosed positive, it has to be sacrificed. But with this limit of detection, nobody would sacrifice a dog because of 5%. So that's a problem. It would be a big improvement if you have a fast diagnosis test that it could improve this. Anyway, the Elinor test, the first version, we got this level of sensibility and specificity. So we believe that we are right in the right track. We do not promise that we have a competitive, we are improving the system. But anyway, we are, and those are our collaborators from biology. Those are the people who give us the samples because they collect on the field from the dogs, and we do the work here. As a matter of fact, we got a paper published, and we applied for patents in US, Japan, and European community, and we got already the patent, this already considered by USPTO, by the Japanese Patent Office, and the European suppose that by the end of this year we get. Of course, this has cost. The university will not pay for this. That's when the partnership between Nanomark, that company I told you, with our university, they are paying for the costs of those international patents. So that's the situation of the patents. Now I come to the final part. I'm talking about the new platform. Now we are substitute the salinizer. We believe, you have reasons to believe that we could improve at least 5 to 10% that linear of sensitivity and specificity. So now you're using a plastic substrate. We control better the position. This is the work, ongoing work of PhD work of Graciela, and we have been able to get this pattern of the position. Each dot of these would be used for a specific test, and I don't want to bother you with details. We control the deposition, morphological, and so on, and the whole idea is to use this for detection of the nucleic acids. So we are doing the test right now with leishmania. We are started this moment with Zika as a model system. So we are trying to use the primer, contra-primer to make the test. Not real samples yet because we want to calibrate our system. But the preliminary results are very promising. You have the blank, the negative, and positive. We get good reproducibility. This is done using a fluorescent microscope. And we are in this level of linear of detection, but we believe that we can improve this, we work on that. And the Zeiss microscope can give you this parameter of intensity. You see completely different results for positive and negative tests. The whole point is that, so when you compare this to available literature, we see that we are in the game. We are in the ballpark, we are in the game, so we have a competitive proposal. The whole idea is how to go to the market. I have a partnership with a small company in Recife. So they are developing a dedicated test. The whole idea is that once you calibrate using the Zeiss microscope, they will have this handheld system, almost handheld, a portable system. Then you can use it to transfer the information. So once this can go to the field and give you a very fast and simple reading of actual samples of the patient. So the whole idea is that once this is finally, the pipeline is finally arranged, then we can go to the field. So the problems in the scientific pipeline, leishmania, HPV, we have already tested. Zika is, we started the work right now. H. pylori, and also going back to the Romário's work to identify Escherichia coli. So as a final part, I'm almost finishing. As a final part, I will present another sideline result. That was the work of Isaac. He did his PhD work. And the whole idea is to develop a leishmania sensor, impediment, but using not fluorescence, but the electrical impedance spectroscopy. And we have been able to show that when you prepare this sensor, we get a good linear of detection of disorders, competitive phantom ball, and in a very linear response in this field. So this completes the overview of the work we have been doing in the past few years and right now in the lab. For the students, I would say that it's a very fascinating field. The interface, the convergence between material science, physics, chemistry, and biological areas, a lot of problems, a lot of scientific challenge, and as I hope to have shown you, a lot of practical applications that could have social impact. That's something that in Brazil, all scientists have to have a look at. I would like, this is a partial picture of my group. Some of the students have already left, some new students. Every September I take a picture, so I approach a new version of the picture. I would like to thank all the financing agencies for this financial support over the time, and all of you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Celso. We have time for questions.
So in your catch and release, you have the particles, magnets, and then you release and use them. How do you, is there a trigger to release with the DNA?
Or mainly by pH change.
Just pH, so you just switch it to, change the from neutral to positive, and it releases the ions.
Mainly the pH.
And then with DNA, you do it the opposite way because it needs
because
electrostatic?
Then the interaction is switched off, and then you release.
So it's purely electrostatic?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly this, yeah. A little bit of both. Yeah. But
More questions? No? Okay. Then let's do. Thank you again, Professor Celso. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Professor Timothy Swager is the John MacArthur Professor of Chemistry at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Director of the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. His work is at an interface of chemistry, biology, and material science. I'd like to thank you for your presence here it's very important your collaboration with our group, with our university, and I'd like to invite you to share with us your important results. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elinando. Pleasure to be here. And can I borrow your laser pointer too? Let's see. Oh, that would be fantastic. Sorry, I forgot mine. I appreciate everybody speaking English today. Portuguese is a beautiful language. I don't speak it, but I also know that it's very challenging to tax your brain to listen in English through all this. But it is important, as our first speaker, Lucia said. It's very important because I think it will help you to project outside of Brazil. I grew up very much in the interior of the United States in a state called Montana. Very few people. I never heard anybody speak a foreign language all my childhood. And yet it was so it seemed safe, but then in the real world, you realize it's very different once you get out and you start going. And so pay attention to home, but look abroad, and I think it will be good for your future. So it's a pleasure to be here. We see Elinando's home. As many of you may know, he spent some time at MIT with me, and we had a very, very fruitful collaboration, and it continues. So it's my pleasure to be here to see where he lives. So today I'm going to tell you about a part of my research program, which is our core. I call it my enduring project, the project that will never die. I will retire showing some of the same slides, I assure. And I've been showing some of the same general slides for 20 years. But it all begins with an idea that I had as a graduate student. When I was younger than many of you, I had this idea because I was working with conducting polymers, and I found that if I just change the atmosphere, the humidity, sometimes their conductivities change dramatically by 1,000 times, 10,000 times. And I thought, maybe this is a good way to make chemical sensors. So let's make chemical sensors. And I thought, okay, so if I'm going to make a chemical sensor, what would be my dream of the ultimate chemical sensor? And it would be one wire, one molecule, or nanowire that goes between two electrodes. Just one. And the reason I want just one, because I want to make it like a wire like creates the electricity in these lights. So you know that these lights, the switch must be turned on. We could have millions of switches that are all turned on, and if I only turn one, and if they're wired together in series, if I only turn one off, all the lights go off. So the idea here with the wire is if I now put chemical receptors or interaction spots, we might call them even selectors, ways of interacting with molecules along this wire, if only one of them is changed, I turn the whole wire off because I can make a barrier so we have charges go through this and I can create barrier that cuts the wire. And because I can have 1 million of these in one row, only one activated, I get amplification. Very, very large amplification. So the idea is many of the things we've worked on have been what we call ultra-trace detection of very few molecules. And this is a goal that we have. Okay, now, I call this inspiration because we haven't done this. This is very hard. People have made single wire devices, but only 1 out of 1,000 work. So we're very practical. We want to commercialize technology, and so we've thought about this. But let me show you how we think about how to make a switch that will turn on and off with a chemical signal. Okay. So here's a conducting polymer, polythiophene. This polymer conducts electricity when you put charge in it. So you must put charge in the polymer to have it conduct. And the charge are cations. We make carbocations in the polymer. And the polymer is a good conductor. So this is the polymer. But we have this group here, this hoop. This cyclophane here now will bind paraquat, which is an herbicide. It's a nasty chemical that you don't want to eat, but it's used to kill weeds. And when paraquat binds inside this cavity, we have two effects. One is it steals electrons from the pi system, makes it harder for positive charge to cohabitate. And also there are electrostatic features because this has 2 positive charges and there's electrostatic repulsion between them. So we create a barrier and it quits conducting. This is another method that we use. This is a very complicated molecule. As you can see, we like to do a lot of synthesis, but there won't be very much synthesis in today's talk. Okay. Here we have a porphyrin that we put cyclophanes top and bottom. We polymerize to make cross-link polymer network. And within this, though, we have spots where there's hydrogen bonding, very small caves that fluoride can get into. And when fluoride gets inside there, fluoride has negative charge, so it tracks the positive carrier and it pins it. It holds it in one place and that blocks the carrier from moving. And again, the same effect, the conductivity goes down dramatically and we get a very powerful signal. And this is extremely selective for fluoride ion. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've done these things here. We've made these receptors, but we have not realized my dream. And there are problems with this. One is if you have soluble polymer and you try to put it between 2 electrodes, it's going to fight back. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics tells you that if you put anything in a closed system, it will try to disorder. You have to put energy in to keep it ordered. Just like your home. To keep your home organized requires energy. If you put no energy, it disorganizes. My daughters in their rooms do not put enough energy into their rooms. Okay, another thing is that a big problem that we always deal with is electrical connections. So I'm trying to take a molecule and connect it to gold or a metal electrode. And those junctions can have resistance also, and that resistance can be dependent upon the environment. So one single connection is also very problematic. So we use many connections to make more robust things. Okay, so, but when I was faced with this, I was working on this problem more than 20 years ago. And I was thinking, okay, I really want to prove, though, that molecular wires amplify. Because when I went around giving lectures as a young assistant professor, everybody told me I didn't know what I was talking about. Molecular wires, you don't know amplification. I look it up in the dictionary. I say, I think it says make larger. And that's what I'm doing. But nobody would believe me. So what I decided to do is do an experiment that would prove to everybody that a molecular wire is an amplifier. And the idea was to get away from the electrodes and to do it photochemically. So what we do is we take the wire, which, as you heard earlier, the conducting polymers have a band of orbitals, a continuum of orbitals. We call it valence band. You might refer to this as the highest occupied molecular orbitals. and it has an empty band called the conduction band, or the lowest unoccupied molecular orbitals. And if you now have these materials and you excite them with light, you can take an electron and move it up and make an excited state. Just like in a molecule absorbs light, now this electron can come back down and fluoresce. But the beautiful thing about the conducting polymer is that it can move. It can move, it can do energy transport along the polymer backbone. It's like a highway for this excited state to move. And if it moves along the backbone, we can find, if we bind different groups of the backbone, we can do chemical reactions. We can do electron transfer reactions. For example, if this is an oxidant, the electron can jump over to this and then back again. I'll show you an example of that. The polymer can oxidize this, that is, the electron can go to the hole and then this one backfills. Or we can do energy transfer to a dye. And I'll show you examples of the first one and the last one here. Now, in order to do this, we found first that when we did this in solution, it was not very efficient. So we made the wire, well, it was efficient. We got 65 times greater effect with the wire than with a small molecule. But I'm a greedy person. I'm an American. We're all greedy, right? And it's probably a fitting characterization of Americans. But I wanted more. And so what we found, the problem was with just one wire in solution, we have this wire isolated in solution, and this excitation, it has no energy telling it where to go. And it goes randomly forward and backward, back and forth, just like you take your automobile and you put it in drive and drive and reverse, backwards and forwards. So it's very inefficient. So what we decided to do, well, we have to now go to give our excitation more freedom. We want it to be able to go up, down, anywhere it wants to go, so it has higher probability of finding what it's looking for. And so we developed polymers that would behave as very good thin film sensors. Okay, this is a polymer that we developed for that. This polymer has these groups on it that create space. So this is like a chemical sponge. This has all these little small spaces in between that small molecules can now diffuse into it, but only very small molecules. It's a very small space. Only single aromatic ring molecules. 2 aromatic rings will not diffuse in. And it's also very luminescent. So what we have is light comes in, we create excited state, it wanders around, and if it wanders far enough, maybe it finds what we're looking for. And the application that we developed this for was for detecting the explosive TNT. TNT is explosive, very inexpensive explosive, easy to use, easy to synthesize, hard to detonate, but it's this explosive used in landmines and many types of things. Here's the molecule TNT. It's very electron poor, and so it has its unoccupied orbital at low levels. And so when our excitation comes around, it will transfer electron to TNT and back again. It goes boom, then boom. We can now do a quenching or reduce the fluorescence. Now, TNT is a challenging molecule to detect because of its vapor pressure. TNT is not a very volatile molecule. Explosives in general are not volatile molecules because you need dense materials to have strong propagation of shock waves through them. And so the TNT is not very volatile. It only has equilibrium vapor pressure, highest of maybe 8 parts per billion. But we can detect it. And so what I'm showing you here is data from a sensor. I'll show you the sensor in a moment. But I want to start by showing you data. So this data, the person is holding the sensor, 2 meters. They look downwind of where they think the wind is going, and they're waiting for the TNT vapor. And they wait and wait and wait, and all at once they get these unusual looking spikes. And you might think that's very unusual sensing data. Not typical. And because what we're seeing here is very trace detection. The TNT is not saturating the world around it. It's coming in terms of what we call a filament. So if I was smoking a cigarette up here, you see a little smoke come. That's called convection because the heat is going. It's a filament. And then eventually get up high and it disperses. We are in the filament region here. So we're detecting the little filaments that are being blown by the wind to us. And you will see that also when you go places. Sometimes I go and I smell something. I say, what was that? And then I come back and I can't smell it again. Because a filament got in my nose and my movement dispersed the filament. So you'll recognize that in your own life. Okay, so here is what the sensor looks like. What we do is we take a capillary tube, we put our polymer on the inside, we illuminate with light, and the fluorescence waveguides through the capillary tube to detector, and we suck air down the center of this capillary, and if the fluorescence goes down, we say there's TNT. Okay? And here it is on a robot. These have been used to do bomb detection. When the United States went into Iraq, we had big problems with bombs on roadsides, and they ended up using our sensors to detect all the bombs. Sometimes at 100 feet or more away, we could smell the bombs, and they knew there was a bomb. But let me show you the test that we did that proved to our military that this worked. And this test was done out in a desert in the southwest United States, very much like the Middle East. And here, when I'm going to play audio with this, and the clicking sound is like a Geiger counter. So higher clicking rate means higher signal. And the soldier is been looking for explosives, but he thinks maybe there's some explosives hidden under this bush. So he's going slower. Looking good. But it's very windy. It goes away, so maybe it isn't right there. Now, very clear signal. So it's time for him to declare victory and then try and break our sensor. He clearly was an 18-year-old soldier. Okay, so this technology has gone on. It's been used in airports different ways in the United States. This was using for liquid explosives. It's been used to detect car bombs on a robotic platform. This is what it looks like these days. It's used by a number of police forces. It's used now in 34 countries, mainly in Europe and the Middle East, in addition to the US. It also works underwater. So we put this on a sea vehicle here, and these very light blue traces are the GPS tracking. So we're just seeing where the thing goes, and there's a simulated mine ordnance, and the water flows this direction, and you can see how it can vector in, and we can detect where the bomb is. Now, we've done unfortunately, explosives detection continues to be a booming business. Joke intended there, booming business, but TNT is not the most powerful explosive. Plastic explosives are more powerful. And RDX is the most common plastic explosive, but it is much more challenging to detect because there are no pi electrons here. Well, there are some pi electrons, but there's no delocalized pi system here. So this is very hard to detect. It's not electronically active like TNT. However, the first time I handled this, I put some up to my nose, and I smelled it, and it smelled awful. And I'm of the generation where I used to smell all my chemicals, and I knew what it smelled like. It smelled like aldehydes and ketones. And in fact is, when you look into it, when you synthesize RDX, you recrystallize it from cyclohexanone, and these are the plasticizers that break down, and so it smells it doesn't smell good. It turns out, in experimentation, if you purify RDX, you crystallize it and get rid of all these, in crystalline form, so it's not plastic anymore, dogs can't detect it. So dogs do not detect this, they detect these things. So we thought, maybe we should detect the same way that a dog detects this explosive. And so I come back to my scheme here and say, is there a way we can adapt my scheme to detect aldehydes and ketones? Now, it's challenging because aldehydes and ketones, again, are not very electronically active. It's very hard to put an electron into a ketone. So you can't do this. It's very hard to oxidize a ketone. We decided we had to do it through this energy transfer mechanism, and we wanted to use ways of recognizing the aldehydes and ketones. And so we used ureas and thioureas, which organic chemists have been using as catalysts to activate ketones in synthesis. We thought we would use these as ways of activating or binding the ketones. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? Well, we take the same polymer I showed you, that's shown here in blue, has those wings on it that give it some small free volume or space between the polymer chains. And what we do is we put a dye into the material. We only put 0.5% of the dye, very small amount of the dye. So lots of polymer, little tiny amount of dye. And this dye, though, as the energy runs through the polymer, when it finds this dye, it transfers the energy to the dye, and the energy is emitted by the dye. So the polymer is an antenna that collects the energy, transfers it to the dye. So what we want to do is we want to break this photonic circuit here with cyclohexanone. And so the idea that if cyclohexanone binds to our dye, can we create a situation where we move the dye just a small amount? Because this is in a thin film. The dye can't be removed from the thin film. We're just going to move the dye by 1, maybe 2 angstroms. Very small. Can we do that and now break this energy transfer? And the trick is to understand the nature of the energy transfer. Okay? So the most straightforward mechanism for energy transfer is something emits a photon and something absorbs. But it's very inefficient because a photon can go in every direction, and it's like hitting a bullseye with a bullet. It's very hard. So this is very inefficient. One of the most efficient areas that many of you who do biological science know is called FRET, or first order energy transfer, and that is dipolar energy transfer. That is the electric vectors that are associated with the electronic transitions couple, and they can transmit light over very long distances. We can do it over, up to 50 angstroms, sometimes even more. Okay? Now, this method, though, requires an overlap. So if we have our donor, our polymer here, and our dye emitter, it requires that the emission, the fluorescence from the polymer, overlaps the absorption of the dye. Okay? Now, a problem with this is we want only 1 angstrom to turn it off. This will not turn off in 1 angstrom. What we really need to have is something called Dexter energy transfer, where we have to have direct high orbital overlap. And the way you think about this energy transfer is called a double exchange mechanism. So we basically have this, we have excited state, this electron jumps over there, that one jumps there, and now we transfer the energy. So you can draw a curved arrow electron transfer mechanism for this. So the key thing here is that we have to do is we have to get rid of that mechanism. We have to avoid overlap. And so we chose a polymer dye combination that has almost no overlap. So this is a squarene dye, Here's where we bind the ketone. Here's our polymer. This is absorption. This is its emission. And you can see there's no overlap. So there should be no or very, very small amount of first or energy transfer. And so when you do this now, and you look at this, again, what we do is we take our polymer, and we only put 0.5% of dye in there. And so this is we excite the polymer. Here we put all the light goes into the polymer. We get some fluorescence from the polymer because not all the excitations find only that 0.5%, very little dye. But we still get quite a bit of energy transfer here to the dye. So this is the dye emission, okay? This is its fluorescence. And then when we add acetone to it, nothing happens. Now, acetone binds. We know that. We can do something called quartz crystal microbalance measurements. It binds, but it's not big enough to move the dye. It's just the dye is very big, acetone's very small. It will not move the dye. But cyclohexanone here is big enough. So it goes in and it basically moves the dye a little bit. So we get a reduction in the emission from the dye, and we get an enhancement in the polymer. The reason the polymer enhances is because now we broke the circuit, and the energy is not flowing out of the polymer anymore, so the polymer can fluoresce stronger because we're keeping the energy within the polymer. So this works really quite well. We looked at it for a number of cyclic ketones. So small cyclic ketones work really well. However, the dye we have has very severe steric considerations, and we put one methyl here, and now it changes. So what we have here is the polymer emission goes up, dye emission goes down, and with all these, and acetone being nothing, all these have a different behavior. This is simple swelling. We're just absorbing material into the polymer, and it's just swelling, and we're getting an enhancement in the overall quantum yield of both the polymer and the dye, because there's always some quenching because of aggregation. So when you swell things, you get increased fluorescence. And the same thing would happen if I exposed to toluene. Okay. However, we can now make sensors. Here's showing the sensing, put in the same sensing platform here, and now this is cyclohexanone. We can reversibly detect cyclohexanone. And we've tested this on a whole library of military explosives. We can detect all plastic explosives this way. Okay, so I went into fluorescence land. We started there because I wanted to prove molecular wires amplify. But this is still my dream. And it's really what we want to do. And we found it was very hard. We needed new ways to think about this. And we decided what we needed was a new platform, because when we start doing the very complicated synthesis and we can't make wires or shape-persistent molecules, we decided we need a new platform. We decided the best platform would be to work with carbon nanotubes. Okay, so carbon nanotubes they're going to be everywhere. They're a new material. You heard a little bit about them earlier, but they are materials of the future. Trust me. They will not go away. They're very complicated materials right now, but they're going to be materials of the future. So if you get a chance to work with carbon nanotubes, do it. It's a good thing to work with. There's lots to be done. Okay, so here is the scheme that is closest to what I showed you before. So if I have an electrode and I have a carbon nanotube and I have something bind, maybe it can cause good conductor up here, it can become poor conductor down below. Okay? So this is what we call intra-nanotube things. But again, people have made sensors with only one nanotube, but only 1 out of 1,000 work. And they don't work very long. They're not technology, they're scientific demonstrations. So what we are going to use is random nanowire networks. We put many carbon nanotubes between an electrode, and when you do that, you have junctions. And in fact, when you have these junctions between nanotubes, this is where most of the resistance is. So this is the majority of the resistance is right here. So this is kind of the hot spot, the switch that we use. And so if you put molecules in between there, you can open the switch and prevent electricity from flowing or current from flowing between them. Now, nanotubes are not soluble materials. you have to work to make them soluble. There are different ways to solubilize them. One way that we've looked at in great detail is to use polythiophene. Polythiophene can be a conducting polymer, but it's also a very nice pi system, very polarizable, and it binds very strongly through van der Waals interactions with the surface of the nanotubes. So you take a nanotube solution, use ultrasonic power to disperse it, and if the thiophene's there, it just wraps it up, and now you get soluble polymers with thiophenes around them. And now we can have solutions, and we can behave just like their normal polymer and make devices. And so we can deposit them on devices. I show here a field effect transistor. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to show you data from that today. We do those types of measurements, but just imagine, again, this one, but this, forget about the gate electrode. That's more complicated than we need today. But the advantages here of the carbon nanotubes are, and these chemi-resistors, are not just that I had a dream when I was a graduate student. They can be the cheapest kind of electronic sensor because you're not going from photons to electricity. You're staying strictly with electricity. Makes it much easier. It can be very low power. I'm going to show you how you can take a cell phone and power a sensor. The cell phone both powers and reads the sensor. So it takes sub-microwatts to run a sensor, and they can be very small. The key here is to get selectivity, though. So I say the good thing about nanotubes is they're very good sensing materials. The bad thing is they respond to everything. So a sensor that just has noise is not very useful. You have to have selectivity. And there are different ways to go about selectivity. If we take the thiophene example I showed you before, we can put a receptor on this. This receptor binds aromatic molecules, and it binds paraxylene stronger than ortho or metaxylene. And what you can see is we get bigger responses to paraxylene here. Now, we saw some response to orthometaxylene because they will just swell. They'll just bind indiscriminately. But the paraxylene fits inside this, and it gets bound more strongly, so it concentrates in the film. If we say it increases the partition coefficient to the film. So what you're seeing here, I'm going to explain this. This is units of conductance. That's just current. So if we put a voltage here, we'll measure the current, and what you can see, this is a negative sign, so this is a reduction in current. So if I look at the current going through here, when I put xeroxylene, the current decreases, and that's because when we put paraxylene in here, the polymer expands. And remember that scheme where the nanotubes have our junctions? We expand it, so there's bigger resistance between the nanotubes. And so this is basically what we call swelling mode, or the inter-nanotube measurement. Now, as Lucia told you earlier, agriculture is a very important place for sensing. And my wife told me some years ago she's very tired of bombs talking about bombs and chemical weapons, and she said, can't you do something more useful and interesting with your life? And so I decided I should go after food sensors. Okay? And the most important gases in food sensors are amines and ethylene. Okay, ethylene gas is C2H4. That small molecule is a universal plant hormone. It controls the ripening of fruit. It controls when leaves drop off trees. It controls when flowers bloom, when flowers want to be pollinated. It is a very universal regulator of all plants. Okay. So, we thought we should detect ethylene. And just to show you kind of example, here is a pear ripening. And this is the ethylene emissions from the pear. So as the pear ripens, it gives off more ethylene. And so if you can detect ethylene levels with this level of resolution, you can tell the pear can ripe. Now you may say, I can tell if a pear is ripe, I just squeeze it. But if you're trying to do this in some automated fashion, managing very large inventories, batches of inventories, you need to do this with a batch or look at the atmosphere coming off materials. Grocery stores can dynamically price produce. They can know, oh, this produce is getting too ripe. The computer says, lower the price. We get rid of it because we need it in people's homes. So it can help for waste of food. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, what we did is I did a lot of organometallic chemistry early in my life. And so what we used is some of my knowledge about organometallic chemistry. And what we did is we recognized that these compounds here combined ethylene. And so what we did is we made a complex between this copper compound, copper 1. Copper 1 is actually the same metal that is in the enzymes that are regulated by ethylene. So this is biomimetic. And we attached it to nanotubes to make chemical sensors. And this worked really quite well. With a single sensor, we found that we could track the ripening. So if you look at this paper, we do a number of fruits over weeks, and we do them at different temperatures, showing that we hit all the right kind of profiles. Some of them go like this, some of them go up straight. They're all different. We got the right ratios, and we got everything using this complex bound to the carbon nanotube. So it worked very, very well. And I was very happy about this because I think if I blindfolded you and I held a banana to your nose and I held a pear to your nose, you could tell the difference. You're not smelling ethylene. You're smelling esters, the fragrances. So esters are polar compounds. So it's really hard to detect ethylene, a nonpolar compound, which is not going to interact as strongly with the charges, the carriers, in the nanotubes. So this was a trick to be able to do this. So I was really happy with this, and we were so confident that we decided we should launch a company. We call it C2 Sense because ethylene has 2 carbons in it. And this company now is going. We have our first product. Okay, it is for monitoring apple cold storage rooms. We have a saying in English: it takes one bad apple to make things bad, right? It actually takes one rotten apple to destroy all the apples because that apple gives off ethylene, and then all the other apples start giving off ethylene, and then all at once they all ripen like that, and it's over. So right now, and certainly in the United States, if we have an apple that we eat in August, it's nice, it's crisp, that apple was picked 11 months before that. And the reason we can eat that is that we can arrest the ripening in cold storage rooms. They do 2 things. One is they use this inhibitor. You treat the apples, you put them in, you treat it. This binds irreversibly in the receptor and inhibits the ripening. Okay? And then hopefully the apples were okay. They were not ripe enough. And if the ethylene level does not go up, then it's okay. You seal up the room and you open it up whenever you want. If the ethylene level goes up, that means you maybe did not get a good enough dose. You may try one more time. If it doesn't, if the ethylene level keeps coming up, what you say is, we have to make apple juice tomorrow. Now we have to make, these are not going to last for 11 months. And so we did this. We did it in 100 locations, 12 countries. One of the countries was Brazil. We did Southern Hemisphere as well as Northern Hemisphere. And now we basically have a system which is going to be used in all apple cold storage rooms by this company called AgriFresh. They manage 25,000 rooms. Each room has $1 million of apples per year in the room. Okay, so one of the things when you start thinking about electrical technologies too, we start thinking about our computer chips, right? So if I have something that looks like a computer chip, I have a chemi-resistor, we can start thinking about, can we now make massively parallel, interconnected sensors? We do this. And we're working with some electrical engineers that have the ability to make millions of sensors. We have no data yet, but we're starting. But I want to tell you about how you think about this big data. Why might you want millions of sensors? Because I can't make 1 million, unique sensors with all my little clever chemistry. I'm not going to make, I take 1 million students to make 1 million molecules, to make 1 million sensors. It's never going to happen, right? So what we tend to do is we tend to make sensors that have more general characteristics, but you needed to separate chemical space, and we're going to work with the fact that the sensors are not perfect. In fact, it's the only perfect molecular recognition is really DNA. Anything that we do or proteins, everything is less than perfect, okay? So if we now make sensors, an array of sensors, we might get a different response to different chemicals like this. But what we can do is we can do mathematical treatments of that data, something called principal component analysis. We can do a statistical treatment, and we can now characterize this. So we can say, this one smells like coffee, like your nose. This one smells like chocolate. That one smells like beer. Your nose can do that. And how does your nose do that? You don't have a chocolate sensor. You might think you do, but you do not have a chocolate sensor. Your nose is looking at all the fragrances and many different things, and your brain remembers through computation, that's chocolate. It does computation. So you can do the same thing, and that's why people often call these cross-reactive arrays, they call them artificial noses. So we've done that. Now, what I've shown you up till now was ways where we wrap nanotubes this way. And the problem with doing the nose experiment here with those is they were not stable enough. The polymers can move, and if you get any changes over time in your signal, you cannot, so when you get a fever, you can't smell, or you get a cold. Your nose gets, just if you have a fever, you can't smell, can't taste. That's because your receptors are out of alignment, and your brain cannot do the computation. Okay? Same thing happens here. So we need a really stable thing. So we do covalent chemistry. We've done on single walls, but I'm going to tell you about how we do covalent chemistry to make it very, very stable. Nothing can move. We're going to staple our chemicals to the surface. And so what we need to do is we need to put things on the surface that basically spread out chemical space. So we need to know the difference between, things that will hydrogen bond donors like that will interact with like esters or ketones, or if we want to detect alcohols, we might have a hydrogen bond acceptor. If we want to detect polar molecules, we need to put polar functionality. If we want to detect aromatic or chlorinated carbons, like I've showed you before, we use these receptors here. If we just want to detect hydrocarbons, we just put long alkanes. So we use kind of very, very basic molecular kind of interactions to do this. And we developed some very efficient chemistry. One thing we need to do is we need to put a lot of these around. So what we want to do is take the multi-wall nanotube here and take the outer wall, the one in yellow, and we just put everywhere these molecules. So there's insulation now. So you have insulated wire, and now we're going to use that insulation, which will change its thickness. It becomes thicker when molecules bind into it, so we get lower conduction. And when it gets thinner, the electrons can get between nanotubes more readily. And so we did a bunch of chemistry here. It's not important, the details. You can read it in this paper if you're interested. But we can put these different groups on it. And I want to draw your attention, we can put this hydrogen bond acceptor, or we can, in this case, using a radical reaction, we can put on these alkane chains. So we put long C12 alkane chains here. And so the data from sensors from those two are shown here, okay? So here what we have is, we have decane, okay? And we have the long alkyl here, and we have the the crown ether, and the long alkyl, and this is just an allo. This is another control experiment. And this is the multi-wall. But what you'll see is when we have decane, which is hydrocarbon, the nanotube that had the long alkyl chains on it responds most because the hydrocarbon likes hydrocarbon. They like each other. Notice the multi-wall nanotubes that are not functionalized have no response. So you have to functionalize them to get response. Now if we look at pentanol, so this is alcohol, but it has C5 chains, so it's not a water-soluble alcohol, it's organic-soluble alcohol. But you see that has the biggest effect with the crown ether, which hydrogen bonds with it. But it also has a good response with this one, the thio chain, the alkane sensor, because it has C5 hydrocarbon associated with it. So we can have, some selectivity. Not perfect selectivity, not even close, but we're getting selectivity that makes sense, okay? And I could go through, many different materials and show you how we did this, but it's easiest just to show you in a heat map. So this is a heat map of all the different sensors we had here, the different sensors, and these are a bunch of different chemicals. And the only thing to see from this heat map is no one row or column are the same. They're all different. So now I can do essentially linear algebra on this. You essentially look at this matrix of data. You can take linear combinations. You can now take those and solve for eigenvectors, which are orthogonal and have maximum variance. It's called principal component analysis. And now what we can do is we can take those linear combinations and we can now take this, 8 by I don't know how many dimensional matrix, and we can make it in 2 dimensions. We can make it very simple. So this is the same computation your brain is doing with your nose, and we have now the 2 principal components, and we have now our data presented this way. And now what you can see is we have alcohols, we have aromatics, hydrocarbons, we have chlorinated hydrocarbons, we have ethers, ketones, and we just have just alkanes or saturated hydrocarbons. Now, as students, you should say, okay, Swagger, you think that we were, this looks like you're cutting things kind of close, right? You're an MIT professor, but you shouldn't get away with that, right? Okay, but let's see what this is, though. Right here, this one right here is dihexyl ether. So this is C6 hydrocarbon, 1 oxygen, C6 hydrocarbon. Is that a hydrocarbon or is that an ether? It's right where it should be. It should be right on the border. This one right here, that is 2-decanone. That is a ketone in a 10-carbon chain. Hydrocarbon or ketone. Right here, this one. That is 1,3,5-trimethylbenzene. So it's a benzene with methyls all around it. So it kind of is aromatic, but it still looks like it's an alkane because of the methyl groups. This is octanol. Again, a very hydrocarbon-rich alcohol. So it all makes sense. So the lesson here is that there's lots to do with just using just very simple chemical principles and separating out chemical space. And this is a way to make a robust artificial nose. Okay, I promised cell phones, because I'm sure I'd be shocked if everybody here did not have a cell phone or smartphone. I think almost everyone does. Okay, and so what we're interested in is now can we take this and use our cell phone and inductively power through RF, radio frequency energy, power the sensor, and now make a device. And the reason for this, which Lucia mentioned in her first talk, is this interconnected Internet of Things. It turns out I've been doing sensor research for a long time, and nobody really cares about the sensors. All they really care about is the data and what they're going to do with the information from the sensors. And that's, for me, was because I was always in love with my sensors. And I realized that this is a way to make people care about my sensors, is to do this. And so we want to know everything about chemical space, and we want to use it in this interconnected way where we can upload everything to the web. So the way we do this is with a passive RFID tag, or at least one of the ways we've done this. We've done it other ways. This is the simplest way. And so what we do is we just buy these tags. These are tags sometimes you find in things in the store, the anti-theft tags. They have the big bars you go out. If you have these in, the alarm goes off. These are what these were used for. And what this is this is just an antenna, a capacitor to tune the RF. So this is a resonant radio frequency circuit. And what in the center here is an integrated circuit. It's just a small chip which has a serial number. It just has the identity of the sensor. And so what we do, there's a couple different ways we've done this, but the way we started with this is we basically just punch a hole here. So we take this nice circuit, which your cell phone, you just download an app from the web. You can read this serial number with your cell phone. And what we do is we destroy the circuit by punching a hole. We just cut the circuit. And then what we do is we reconnect it with nanotubes that are functionalized nanotubes, or nanotube sensors. And we can put enough nanotubes to where the sensor functions properly again. And then if you increase the resistance of the nanotube, it quits functioning. Or we can make maybe less nanotubes that aren't quite conductive enough to where it doesn't function, and then we can activate it and make it function. So we can turn on or off, okay? So right now, this is just simple binary, the simplest possible sensor, just on, off. But this, I show you this may sound like a dumb type of sensor because we're not getting quantitative data, but it can be very useful. And I want to show you a video of how you might use this sensor. And this is a video that was done by one of my students that was one of the inventors of this. And he has a little demonstration, real-time demonstration of how you can detect explosives inside a box. I call it the bomb in the box video.
On the left, we have an unmodified control tag. This tag will always be readable. On the right, we have a sensor tag. This tag will only turn on in the presence of an explosive. Notice how the phone does not read the sensor tag when the box is empty. Now I will place an improvised explosive mimic into the box. This mimic is chemically equivalent to many common explosives. Again, scanning the control tag indicates the system is functioning properly. Now, with the explosive material in the box, the sensor has turned on, and we see the message verifying that an explosive material has been detected. This information could automatically be relayed to the authorities.
I think you can see how that would be powerful if you could just detect. But maybe you can detect if the produce is ripe or not. So we've done this for a number of different ways. We're making wearable toxic chemical sensors. But the people who sponsor our research are the Department of Defense, so we have to detect chemical weapons. But we're interested in things that, if you're working in manufacturing, you're going to be exposed to a lot of chemicals. You would like to know your cumulative dose of chemicals. So these are what we call dosimeters. A dosimeter, the sensors I've shown you now, they go up and down. Those are real-time sensors. The dosimeter just goes up and stays up. But it gives you it's like an integrator. It gives you your cumulative dose, which is very important for your health. Okay? So we made dosimeters here in those papers for chemical weapons. But again, to keep my wife happy, I'm trying to work with food. And so I want to come to the last part here and show you something that hasn't been published yet. It's going to come out in just a few days, I think, in a journal called Sensors. And this is how we can detect the freshness of produce inside packaging. So right now, I haven't been to the supermarkets in Brazil, but if you go to a supermarket in the United States, you find lettuce in particular, or broccoli, or things are in packages. And they're all in plastic packages. And the reason they're in plastic packages is they have modified atmosphere in the packaging. They deplete the oxygen, so the microbes cannot grow fast. And that gives much longer shelf life. It keeps it fresh longer. Now sometimes though, the package fails. And my wife sometimes brings home things from the store and I open it. It smells horrible. But she could not tell. She couldn't tell looking at it that it was on its way out. And so what we've done is we've created oxygen dosimeters. So the key to this is if there's oxygen ingress, then the packaging is compromised. It can be just a little pinhole. It could be that they didn't get it sealed up right in the first place. And so what I'll show you here is how we can use this to detect oxygen ingress. And we use a little different way to make our nanotubes. Okay, we basically now disperse them. And all of you could do this. This is a commercial polymer. Very easy to do. This is commercial material. We take a surface, we functionalize it with this silicon, with this bromide. We take nanotubes that are dispersed with polyvinyl pyridine, and we now spray coat them on a surface. And what happens is this pyridine reacts there, and it links the nanotube to the surface. So it makes for a very stable sensing platform. The nanotubes are all linked down very, very covalently to the surface. The nice thing about this is now we can take our nanotubes, we just make the nanotubes like this, and now we can start doing chemical treatments on them, and they don't move. We can do reactions, we can add other chemicals, so it's a very nice platform to make many different things. And I'll show you here how we put metal particles. What we do is we put iron, well, we don't put particles, we put particles initially, but we put iron 2 compounds on these. Now, iron 2 coordination compounds are air sensitive. Iron 2 will be oxidized iron 3. And so what happens here is initially iron 2 is a reducing agent. The nanotubes have positive charge in them, so they're what we call P-type conductors. The iron reduces all the positive charge, so now they're insulators. And then when oxygen oxidizes the iron 3 oxidizes the nanotubes and they become conductive. And so what we can see here is we can get increases in conductivity when we expose to oxygen with iron. Other metals are not as sensitive. We tried other metals here, but iron seems to work the best. So we just take the nanotubes, we put iron salts in there. Again, safe things that you can use around food. Okay? Iron salts. And now we can now make a oxygen dosimeter, which now works with our RF tag here. And so now what I'm showing here, this is gain. So I'm not showing you, but we can use a cell phone, but we can measure more precisely using something called a network analyzer. We actually look at reflected RF signals coming out. So we learn a little electrical engineering in my group and do this. And but here is kind of a trace of that and how we can set the threshold. We can decide where the cell phone turns on and off and what it should be. And we were able to set that and demonstrate it with broccoli and tea, different types of packaging. We put broccoli under inert atmosphere, we make our own packaging, and then we can to put our sensor inside. But it works quite well. Okay, so it's time for me to close. I have a very wonderful research group. They're all smarter than me. Maybe not as experienced as I am, but they're definitely smarter. And they work very hard. And the people that did the work today, I told you some very old studies. I mean, these guys here are both full professors in Japan and in Taiwan. In Taiwan and Japan. She's a professor. She's been in industry, but the other people here are still around who did the work, and their names were on the slides that I show you. So with that, I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for this amazing lecture. We have time for questions. Professor Celso.
Thank you for a fascinating lecture. I was wondering, I suppose you have already examined this, the possibility of using those aroma sensors in diagnosis for diseases or biological, like mold or other biological systems.
Yeah, so the question is, a very important application is breath analysis. It's accepted that you should be able to diagnose many diseases by breath. And this has been known, they used to use dogs hundreds of years ago to do this. And that is true. That is an application we're interested in. In fact, this gentleman right here, Joe Azzarelli, is in the process of starting a company around this. For me, when you do biological testing, it's very challenging though, because you have to, if you're going to work with real human subjects, we have something called an internal review board. We have many laws and regulations in the U.S. And then if you go to commercialize, you have a very, very challenging in the United States, very capital intensive. So, but he's fearless, and he's going to try and do this. He is probably going to work, I mentioned my collaboration with electrical engineer to make millions of sensors. He's probably going to work with that platform rather than our simple platforms. But because I think we need more sophistication. The markers, when people do these markers, sometimes there are hundreds of markers they're looking at. And so we're afraid we don't know how to do it with ours, so he's going to go with kind of a more broad approach to do it.
Also in the food quality control, like the presence of mold or of, because I suppose it has some aroma marker that you can identify yeast and things like that compromise the quality of the food, of the product.
Yeah, yes, I didn't cover. We actually have done. We've actually done meat spoilage sensors. We let meat. In our lab, we did real meat sensing with fish and meat, fish, pork, chicken, and beef. We did all those, and we did it with looking at different biogenic amines, like cardamidine and putrescine, things that smell very bad. And then we've also done sulfur detection, thioethers. And so we can do thiols, thioethers, thioesters. We've done all these different sulfur detection. And so we've applied both of those to food decay. I just didn't show it here. But that's all these technologies, food technologies, are all going into the company C2 Sense right now.
More questions?
Just for the students, one fundamental rule about questions: there is no such thing as a dumb question. They never exist. I've never heard a dumb question in my life.
I have one question.
Okay.
It's about the cell phone, the lifetime of your antenna. It's necessary some purge.
Yeah. So it turns out, okay. So whenever you start working in a lab, trying to get things that are really robust for the real world, can be challenged. So when we first started ethylene sensing with C2, our sensors only lasted days. Now they last like as long as you want, 6 months or whatever. Now the RFID, now the big problem with the sensors that C2 Sense uses is we take the electrodes and we apply a constant voltage across them all the time, very small voltage. But sometimes you get some damage, just electrolysis damage. The RF sensors are actually much more stable because you're just applying a very weak, you can't, it's so small a field, and you're applying very little stress to the materials, and they seem to last indefinitely. They're the most stable sensors we've made. And so I keep telling my group we should do everything. I want the group to do AC things, and as you know, we're maybe electrically challenged in my group. You could do this, but my group, we have to work to do more capacitive sensing and do AC sensing. But I think that and RF sensing are probably the future rather than just simple chemi-resistor.
Very, very good. More questions?
Thank you for talking. The system to detection of explosions can detect other explosion. You talk about TNT, can detection others?
So we've done peroxides. So the technology that was in airports was peroxide sensor. So the airports didn't want the other ones. They wanted liquid explosives. So peroxides we've done a lot of peroxides. The things that we tend to work on are all volatile. So some very powerful explosives are like perchlorates, perchlorite, or sodium ammonium ammonium nitrate and urea nitrate. Those are okay. Those tend to give off a little bit of amine sensing. So you can get those by looking at trace amine. detect vapors. But there's always more and more explosives to try and detect. We've done nitroesters, things like PETN, which is a detonation. It's a very sensitive explosive. We've done that too. So we've done pretty much every type we can think of.
Okay. More one question or not? More questions? Okay, let's thank again Professor Timothy Schwager. Thank you. And I would like to invite all of you to others in the outside of this room. We have a coffee break. Thank you very much for your attention, your presence in our workshop. Thank you.